All right, so thanks everybody for coming out. And today we have a really a special investment opportunity. It's not often in life that you get a true double bottom line opportunity to invest as a venture capitalist. And today with Ultra Testing, we have exactly that situation. And I'm really excited to have Rajesh on with us today. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to him and let him get started.
All right. Well, it's great to have some time with everyone, and we're excited to have you guys participate if this makes sense as an investment for Wasabi. I'm Rajesh Anandan, one of the co-founders of Ultra. My co-founder Art is holding down the fort while I'm sitting here in a car back from a sales meeting, but. We started Ultra about a little over, closer to 6 years ago, let's say 5 years ago, with a very simple mission.
We got Rajesh frozen. I don't know if that's... You froze there for a second there,
Rajesh. And our approach, I'll go off video.
I took you off video. Why don't you go ahead and start again, because you froze almost like after you said that you started 6 years ago.
Okay. So my co-founder Art and I started the company 5 to 6 years ago with a simple mission to prove neurodiversity, including autism, could be a competitive advantage in business. And our equally simple approach to achieving that mission was to build a world-class business that could be the best in our industry. And the industry we entered was the quality services arena, which includes software testing, software quality assurance, and quality engineering. Increasingly, we're moving into data quality and analytics, and now starting work on machine learning results validation and AI testing. And at the core are or in the future, a machine learning model or an AI tool. The reason we believe that we can build a business and a quality services firm that can compete and win and be better than anyone else that is currently in the industry is because there is a extremely tight overlap between the kinds of traits that you would look for when hiring a quality engineer. Things like pattern recognition, systems thinking, focus, logical reasoning, learning agility. Those types of traits are over-indexed in an autistic talent pool relative to the general population, and there's a fair bit of evidence pointing to the validity of that hypothesis. And that's not to say, of course, that everyone who's autistic is going to have these attributes, and that's not the case, or that everyone who's neurotypical doesn't have these things. It's simply that there is a higher likelihood that we'll find people who fit this profile that we're looking for among an autistic talent pool. And there are 50,000 young autistic adults who turn 18 and enter the workforce every year. So over the next decade, 500,000 new workers who are more likely to have this profile than the general population. And there's already 4 million American adults on the spectrum. And at the same time, 85% of that talent pool are unemployed or underemployed because they're wired differently. But being wired differently doesn't have to be a disadvantage at all. In fact, we think it can be an advantage. And we've set out to build a company that can reimagine how a business hires talent and manages teams and runs the organization so that no one's penalized for being wired differently. And in fact, that we reauthor and redesign the enterprise to tap into those differences and allow our hybrid, neurotypical, neurodivergent teams to perform at their best and ultimately outperform the competition. So we're pretty far in at this point. We've been growing fairly consistently at over 50% a year, which is good for a services firm. We're at a run rate of about 3.5 million based on our last quarter's revenues. We've proven out the unit economics repeatedly. So when we started in 2013, within 6 months, we got to break even. We raised a initial seed round in 2014, and really just to build some basic internal systems for recruiting and training. We got back to profitability in 2015 and raised the second seed round of $1.5 million in convertible notes in 2016, and really invested to take what we've learned and go to market, develop our service offering beyond just testing websites to do actual QA, and go after enterprise clients and compete. And we then got back to profitability in 2018, and we've been accelerating since. So Q4 2018, our EBIT was close to 10%, just short of. A good services firm should be 15 to 20%. Gross margins were over 30%. Good gross margins in our industries would be 35 to 40%. But we're subscale, so and within striking distance. So we feel really confident that we can build a fast-growing and profitable services firm that can compete and win in this quality services arena by tapping into the talent pool we have. And in order to get here, we had to figure out how to recruit talent who may not have a resume or don't have work experience and may not do well in an interview. And so we have arguably one of the more objective screening processes around, where we can take someone who's never done this thing before, never worked in quality assurance or engineering, may or may not have a college degree, we don't care, may never have had skilled work before, but at the end of our screening have a 95% degree of confidence that we've found someone who can be not just good at what we do, but great at it. And within a few months be doing billable work, and within a year, staffed on an engagement that can take on some complex work in an enterprise setting. For example, about a year ago, we went head-to-head with Capgemini, who are large global IT player in our space, and won a API test automation and data quality engineering engagement away from them for an AIG business unit that was an insurtech software division that they'd acquired a startup and they were building out. And on that team, there's 8 folks. 6 are on the spectrum, 4 are women. Nobody's had any insurance experience before this engagement, and no one had any quality engineering or quality assurance or even skilled work experience before they joined Ultra. The lead API test automation engineer, her only work experience was working part-time in a bakery. The lead data quality engineer on that engagement, his only work experience was working 6 hours a week at a FedEx copy center. And within 3 months, we'd gone from a pilot to a recurring contract, which we just extended. It's an open-ended recurring contract at $90,000 a month, which, at our scale, that's massive. And we've added so much value in the time we've been working with them that when their insurance platform first went live, the CEO made it a point to call out Ultra at their launch party to say, we wouldn't have gone here without you guys. And today, whenever they hire engineers internally on their dev team, their underwriters send them over to Ultra to learn underwriting, because our team was able to ramp up on their industry and get to know their business as well as they do, because our talent pool and the profile of engineers we have are not just great and have quickly developed the technical skills they need to do sort of test automation and sort of the more quality engineering work, but also are exactly the kind of teammates you'd want to get up to speed on a highly complex regulated industry. And so as we look ahead, and the reason we're raising our Series A now is we want to essentially take what we've learned and pour some rocket fuel in and start to really accelerate our trajectory, going from what is now a 60-person company. We built the first remote workplace for autistic talent. So we have employees in 20 states across the US. We're all on shore. 3/4 of our team are on the autism spectrum. And we'd like to be at a several hundred-person scale, because at that point we will really have proved the thesis around building a highly competitive business. But at that point, we also will be north of 20 million in revenue, and a sizable partner for any of the global IT and consulting firms who are constantly looking for sort of high growth services firms in niches. And data quality is certainly a niche that's hot right now. And as we develop services around machine learning, we'll continue to stay in that space. And as a testament to the potential of the business, the outgoing CEO at Cognizant is going to be investing personally. The outgoing president, we're hoping will join as our independent director of the board. And those two guys built Cognizant from when they spun out of Dun & Bradstreet as nothing to a $12 billion business. And they see the real need for finding great talent who can take on the more complex parts of quality engineering, and the attractiveness of the data space that we are entering into. So to just put some numbers on the business, in 2016, when we last raised our last seed round, about 5% of our revenue was coming from enterprise clients. Last year, 60% of the revenue was from the Fortune 500. In 2016, most of the work was manual and website testing. Last year, the majority of the work was a combination of manual and automation, where we were expanding our sort of footprint of services in some of the enterprise clients. And 20% of the revenue was already data quality engineering, starting from a standing start the year before. And at this point, we work with companies in financial services, healthcare, media, and then some software clients as well. Slack, for example, is a client. We were only one of 2 outside QA vendors they've let in because they care deeply about quality. And we have proved that we can actually win these enterprise engagements and stick around and grow these accounts. And we're just excited to be able to have some capital to invest. And once we raise the round, we're going to first boot up sales and marketing. We've gotten this far with a fairly lean effort in terms of driving sales and no marketing. We do drive a ton of earned media and word of mouth and referrals because of the mission. That gets us in the door. It shortens our sales cycle. Doesn't help us close. No one's hiring us because of the mission, but it certainly does help us get in the door. Secondly, we want to invest in upskilling our team. Today, it takes us maybe 18 months to have someone go from a novice who's never done this thing before to a skilled quality engineer. But we have very little sort of intentional training that we've implemented, and we've started to take the first steps on building a accelerated program to shrink that horizon from novice to engineer from 18 plus months to 5 to 6 months. And we think we can actually get there fairly quickly. And then thirdly, to continue to evolve our services. Again, we're just following the value in the enterprise. Wherever that value is, somebody's building something that needs to be checked, and where quality needs to be designed in from the beginning, and where the stakes of poor quality are fairly high, whether that's on the front end and experience, or on the back end and analytics and insights. We continue to see the need for the work we do. The nature of it will evolve, and we just need to keep evolving our services with it. And then the final piece is to invest a little bit in taking everything we've learned in terms of how we run our very diverse and neurodiverse team, and translating those business practices and norms into simple tools that make it a whole lot easier for others to adopt what we're doing and embrace neurodiversity and follow this path. So let me pause there. I think that was a little over 10 minutes.
That was perfect, Rajesh. That I think everybody got a really sort of good feel for everything. So anyone who is on the app, if you, I'm going to kick off and ask a couple questions. But if you have questions and you don't want to speak, you can use the chat function in Zoom. Just hit the chat button and it'll pop up. And if you send a question, I will ask that for you if you don't actually want to speak out loud, which is fine. So Rajesh, let me ask you a question. And actually, it's always good to ask questions where you already know the answer. If I was a lawyer, that would make me really useful, I suppose. But my question is around, talk a little bit about some of the secret sauce that you really have around that sort of talent selection and talent acquisition pool, because that's really, in many ways, that's sort of what's the separator for you.
Sure. So a few things. I'd say first, starting with candidate sourcing or applicant sourcing. We're the only group that I'm aware of, for-profit or nonprofit, that is going directly to the source, as it were. So the way we source applicants is that over the years, we've built out a database of about 100, we call them nodes, places online where adults on the spectrum are likely to be. You know, it might be websites like One Planet, or much more niche blogs or social media groups. And through that network, when we post a job, we repeatedly get overwhelmed with applicants. And that direct approach is very different from what a lot of other kind of autism employment initiatives the approaches that we're seeing, which are much more around working with nonprofit job placement groups and state or local vocational rehab groups, because the reality is, you know, not everyone that has the profile we're looking for is going to be seeking those services, and some of those systems aren't, you know, particularly great for a job seeker. And then the second is that because from day one we set out to build a remote workplace, and we were told we couldn't do it by the quote experts, all of whom were neurotypical, by the way. But there was a sense that, you know, autistic talent would need close supervision, and therefore you needed to be on site. And that turned out to be fairly, you know, patronizing and not true. The other set of concerns were valid and fair, which is that relatively speaking, autistic adults can be more socially isolated, and social isolation is a real challenge and an issue for the community. And therefore, creating remote work where you're going to be sitting at home working instead of being in an office environment could just worsen that sense of isolation. And that's something we tackled head on. We actually measure loneliness, workplace loneliness. We invented a simple sort of mechanic or metric around it called the net loneliness score, which is, think of it like customer net promoter, but for team connectedness as a leading indicator of engagement and performance. It was just name one of Fast Company's world-changing ideas, but these are simple things we've done. All that to say, we're tapping into a talent pool, including a segment of the talent pool who may not actually feel comfortable commuting into an office and then sitting in this public space with a whole bunch of other people and sensory stimuli that they can't control. And autism being a spectrum with a wide range of, including a wide range of needs and triggers, being able to work from the comfort of your own home, for our team at least, has been a welcome sort of change from versus feeling forced to be in an environment that isn't optimally designed for them. So that's one, which is just, we're able to source talent anywhere because we're remote, and we've gone directly to the community where our candidates are likely to be found. Obviously, we're doing some of the more traditional stuff, like we're building out relationships with a lot of the universities that have more targeted programs for students who are on the spectrum, that have technical backgrounds and so on. We do work with some of the nonprofit groups, but that's not really the core of where we source. So that's one, which is how we source applicants. And then part of that is because we're remote, we're not constrained, unlike every other initiative in this space. But at the same time, we don't see ourselves as competing with these initiatives. There need to be multiple pathways and multiple options for a autistic talent pool, just like any other talent pool. The second is the way we screen is fairly objective. And instead of trying to pattern match the past, so years of work experience in a similar kind of field or degrees or certifications, we fundamentally believe that those things, years of experience or degree, are very poor predictors of on-the-job performance, and therefore we don't care about a resume. We also believe that a subjective interview assessment is a poor predictor of on-the-job performance, so we don't really care about interviews. And we've replaced that toolkit with a process that looks very different. We start by defining the job in very discrete terms, in terms of both abilities and skills that you would need to be successful in the job, as well as behaviors and traits, and then construct a screening process that tries to validate each of those abilities and traits. It turns out like skills are easy to validate, so or even abilities. So if we're looking for someone who's great at pattern recognition or logical reasoning, we have constructed a couple-hour test that gives us an objective score. Behavior traits are harder, and usually interview is used to try to suss out things like coachability or learning agility, and it's nonsense. You really can't objectively assess those things. And so the 8th step in our recruiting process is a week of simulated work where we do get to then try to gather objective data, or as objective as we can, on behavior. So, we care about coachability. Great. We have a week to give someone feedback and see how they do. Can they internalize it? Do they get defensive, and so on? Learning agility. We can throw a new tool at someone they've never seen before and see how deeply they ingest it and how driven they are to learn it beyond the bare minimum, how able they are to apply it in a new context. And so as a result of that, we can take someone who's never done this thing before and be extremely confident at the end of our screening that they're going to be great at it. So that's sort of the front end of it. I would say there's some interesting tools coming out that are, AI-driven ways to very quickly have people play a game or do a puzzle or this kind of thing and spit out a profile. The current state is not there yet. We're hoping that over the next year or two, these tools will get to a point where we can use them to eliminate some of the more manual tests that we've constructed. We don't see them replacing some of the behavioral observations. But I will say, while we do this for our new like software testers or analysts who have no work experience, we adopt the exact same approach for every job at every level. So we use job tests and we make people do assignments. We're just going through recruiting a salesperson. We're having them do the same thing because the reason why we do it is the same, which is it's a more effective way to screen talent. Not that there's some very special way to recruit autistic talent and make autistic people jump through hoops that others aren't. Everybody jumps through hoops, and they're not hoops; they're just objective tests. Sorry, a little bit of a soapbox there, but we're seeing what we're seeing out in the world is going in a direction that feels really uncomfortable, where there are sort of these separate processes for someone on the spectrum to go through in order to get a job that others aren't required to. And you'd never do that if you replaced autistic with woman or person of color. And these mistakes are being made in large enterprises, and we're hoping that shifts. But certainly for us, as a matter of principle, the changes we're making, whether it's to recruiting or communication or management, are universal. They're better for everyone. And by the way, they're designed to not penalize someone for being wired differently. We also think of training and professional development in a very specific way. So for quite a few of our colleagues, not everyone, but enough of our colleagues, needing to know how you're doing is really important. And not knowing how you're doing, not knowing precisely what the expectations of the job are or project are, or how you're doing relative to those expectations, can create quite a bit of stress and anxiety. And that's unproductive, not good for the person's well-being, not good for the team's productivity. So we continue to push the envelope on how precise we can be in defining the expectations of a role. We are about to roll out the sort of current iteration of it, which, for example, takes like a tier 1 tester. We had previously defined it in terms of a set of 15 skills, some technical, some more professional. But for each of those skills, like, for example, can author a test case. Okay, but what is that? What is good? What's great? And our team spent a lot of time about how do we meet the expectations of this job? And so instead of having can author test case, we've then translated that sort of single skill definition into 4 to 5 behaviors that you can demonstrate if you want to demonstrate to yourself or your team that you're great at this authoring test case thing. And then along with that, provide a set of resources that you can learn and go to and reference and consult with in order to gain mastery of test case authoring, in order to demonstrate the behaviors you need. And that level of specificity is what our team needs. And we think, frankly, again, this is just good for everyone, for every role, to know the expectations of your job at a level of specificity. Obviously, as people get more senior, it's harder to define those things, but certainly in terms of an on-ramp into a job for the first few years, the first 2 or 3 steps you take, we think this is mission critical. And then simple things we do to help our team communicate and get to know each other and stay connected. When we polled our team very early on about root causes of stress and anxiety, we were surprised that things like, constant change, because we're in the services business and clients change their minds and deliverables shift and deadlines move, that wasn't a big deal because we built in some sort of constraints and control and predictability around it. Neither was needing to, communicate directly with colleagues or clients or interact with people through an issue tracking tool or Slack or whatever it was. Number one fear, the number one root cause of stress and anxiety on our team was the fear of being misunderstood. Because as one of my colleagues pointed out to me, if you all your life growing up have been reprimanded or scolded or treated badly because whenever you opened your mouth, you said the wrong thing, or you said too much, or you didn't say enough, or you didn't get it, or you were talking off topic, then yeah, you're just going to be not very eager to communicate, and that's going to create a lot of stress and anxiety. And so communication, and the communication across our teams, neurodivergent and neurotypical, in forging these collaborative relationships has been a focus for us, because ultimately that's what's going to unlock our team's sort of real potential, because people stop worrying about being misunderstood or worrying about how someone else might perceive their actions, and they're just free to get on with their work. Simple tools we've developed. A couple of years ago, one of my colleagues said, I could never figure out how to work with some of the people on my team. I wish they came with a user manual. Like, why can't humans have a quick start guide? And everybody on the team thought this was amazing. And today, everybody in the company has a quick start guide. It's the kind of user manual for how to work with me. We call it a biodex. And it has 20 something fields. Some of them are very general around just working together, average response time on Slack, for example. Because on our team, we have colleagues who, they might Slack someone, and if they're waiting and they don't know how long they're waiting, or they need to be waiting, that could create a ton of anxiety. But why not just know how long you're likely to wait? And so now you don't need to worry about it, or how you prefer to receive critical feedback. And feedback and coaching, obviously, is extremely important, because our whole business is based on a premise that we can have colleagues join us who have no experience and very quickly become the best in this field. And so being able to give feedback and receive feedback is quite important, but it's also tricky. So we might have a team where we have colleagues who have generalized anxiety disorder or workplace PTSD, and you still need to run those teams efficiently because we're a business. And so a simple fix is to let each colleague actually define how they prefer to receive feedback, and it's in their biodex. So, timing for critical feedback. Do you want it in the moment, which is sort of, quote, best practice, but frankly, the worst practice for most of our colleagues, because they'd rather receive it at the end of the day or at the end of the week. Do you delivery? Do you want it in person? Which again is, quote, best practice, but for us, not so much. For quite a few colleagues, they'd much rather receive it in writing first, have a chance to digest it, and then ask questions in a live conversation if they want to. Framing of that feedback, because enough of our colleagues have had enough negative experiences that get triggered, that a simple thing is just phrasing something a certain way that they can define as their preference could make it a whole lot easier to hear that feedback. And ultimately, feedback is for coaching, and this is important. So instead of just guessing or applying some single rule that doesn't actually work for most people, everyone's biodex has these feedback preferences. It's a single call on Slack. It's super easy. And something like the biodex is a tool that whenever we mention it to anyone, pretty much every client wants it. And today it's not really a thing, but we're building a simple Slack bot that allows us to actually have other teams outside the company adopt it very quickly. And once they do, and we start seeing what types of attributes of work are more commonly called up or looked up, and what types of responses are likely to be useful, that allows us to also obviously improve the tool itself while gaining some real insights on how neurodiverse teams work.
That was a great, thorough answer, Rajesh. Thanks. I'm going to switch gears on you and ask a question. And a lot of this will be covered in our due diligence, but I think it's useful to hear you talk a little bit about it. Talk to me a little bit about who's investing in this round, and why having those investors is important to the growth of the business beyond the money that's coming in.
So we've got a group of investors. It's a combination of impact funds and family offices and some individuals. So Sustain VC or an impact fund, and I think you guys have worked with them or run into them before. They're leading the round. And the lead partner there, Eric Chapman, is 20 years at Accenture, and we're really excited to have someone who's got consulting and large-scale consulting experience. I spent 5 years at Bain, but obviously not at the level of running a 2,000-person organization or a business unit. Disability Opportunity Fund are one of the other impact funds. They primarily have invested in sort of disability employment and housing initiatives. They've funded another autism-related employment firm. It's a car wash out in Florida called Rising Tide, which are one of the 2 or 3 examples of companies that are for-profit companies that have scaled to more than couple dozen people. And then in terms of family offices, we have Candide Group, which is the Pritzker's sort of impact funding, and a couple others that are more private. And then individuals who are investing in this round, with Frank D'Souza, who's the outgoing CEO at Cognizant, who I mentioned, Russ Hagee, who's the Chief Talent Officer at Bain & Company. And obviously they bring a point of view that we're more than happy to be able to tap into, and they've both been very generous with their time to us already, and we're excited to have them on board as we look at the next phase.
Super. Okay, so I'm gonna take this opportunity to unmute everyone if you'd like to ask a question. So I'll count to 3 just in case you're somewhere where there's a big barking dog or getting onto a subway. You can mute yourself back, but this will give everybody a chance to ask a question if they have any. So 1, 2, 3, and everybody is unmuted. Does anybody have a question for Rajesh? All right, we'll give it a couple seconds. Everybody muted themselves, I think, Rajesh. So that could say that your layout is your overview has been so thoroughly good. I do have one last question for you as well. You talked a little bit about sort of the opportunities for an exit here. Give us a sense of any data that you might have of what kind of exits have happened in this sort of QA data analysis sort of space, over the last handful of years. Any insights that you can give there would be great.
All right, sorry, I was muted there. So we haven't come across direct comp. So first, in the software testing space, it's very crowded, and it's a mature market. In the data quality space, it's new enough where there aren't really established players. You'd be hard pressed to find market research on data quality engineering or data quality service providers as a group, because it's just so new. The few data points we have are based on just feedback from folks who inside some of the larger consulting groups that are on the lookout for acquisitions of this nature. And so, for example, from Frank D'Souza, who's the outgoing CEO at Cognizant, his point of view was anytime we get north of, let's say, 15, 20 million in revenue, we're at a couple hundred people, we're at a scale where they would look at us. And if we've built a business, a data quality business at that scale, and we've got a footprint in Fortune 5 clients already, that's highly relevant. And they would look at multiples, using like a simple EBITDA multiple of, let's say, up 15x would be good, where we've been able to show EBIT margins of 15 to 20%. We're growing at a healthy clip, and so on. The other sort of well-placed point of view on this was from Hal Lavender, who helped build IBM's cognitive computing practice, and has sold in a bunch of their work in the data quality and analytics space. And his point was none of the big guys, except Cognizant, actually, interestingly enough, Accenture, Deloitte, etc., they don't have data quality services arms. They don't specialize in that. And what they try to do, including IBM, is to have software testing teams do the data quality work, and it just falls apart because software testing is fairly domain agnostic. You just need to understand the functionality of the thing you're trying to improve, and then obviously have the technical skills. With data quality, you actually need to understand the domain. And so, for example, in the AIG case study that I mentioned, in order to be of value, we were brought in to essentially do end-to-end testing of their InsurTech platform. And that included, front-end testing and API testing and automating the whole thing so that we could sort of test combinatorially and have a lot of coverage without a lot of humans. So we did that. The thing that actually won them over to us, and then that's rolled on to this big engagement, is that we were also able to actually validate the accuracy of the quote, the pricing that that their engine produced. So as they were providing a quote in real time to a broker, we were able to go in and actually check whether that thing was accurate. To do that, we needed to understand and ingest all of their underwriting rules, overlay those rules on sort of the federal and state level pricing regulations, which varied by product, and turn that into an algorithm that allowed us to actually check the accuracy. So all that to say, doing that is not easy. It's particularly well suited for our talent pool, and the Accentures of the world don't have people, lots of people who are able to do that. And so we think that any of these large consultancies, and you could go a tier down to the Capgeminis of the world, who are the guys we displaced at that AIG business unit, where they would be keen to look at bringing in a couple 100-person business that's specialized in quality engineering in the way that we do. So that's a long-winded way of saying we went out to try to find comps, and well, first, we're cheap and we didn't buy a lot of research reports, but we also just weren't running into comps in the quality engineering space because there isn't, it's not an established space yet. I see a question in chat. Can you lay out where this round of financing will take you and the capital efficiency of the business? Sure. So, the good and bad thing about services is, one, it's fairly easy for us to pull the levers and get profitable. So we can, because we're not making massive infrastructure investments. So, we were able to get to break even within 6 months of launching. And then after our first seed round, we got back to break even in a year. After our second seed round, we got back to profitability in a year and a half. And so as we raise this round, we're older founders. We've been burned before, and we are keen to sort of invest and get the business back to profitability and never have to raise money again. Although maybe we will, but really, we don't ever want to be in a position where we're under the gun, having built an impact business with a couple hundred people who are employed for the first time and need to somehow be in a rush to make any decision. So our plan is to invest this round in the 4 areas that I mentioned. So ramp up sales and marketing, really invest in training and upskilling our team and the new recruits who are coming in, continuing to do R&D around the services and sort of evolve our service offering. And then the fourth piece around really building some simple tools around our internal business practices, which we will share very openly, which, on the one hand, are we giving away the secret sauce? Not really. It's one thing to be able to adopt some of these practices. It's a whole other thing to be sort of leading the thinking and shaping this entire space. And frankly, we don't want to end up winning because we held on to the secrets around neurodiversity. It's not misaligned for us. But our plan is to invest in those 4 areas over the next 2 years. So from, starting July this year, a couple years in, and get back to profitability at the end of that horizon. And while we're doing that, continue to keep growing at the same pace we've been growing at 50% a year, roughly doubling every couple of years, so that, looking 5-6 years out, we're well north of $20 million in revenue. And at that sweet spot of a small but relevant scale for some of the global players that I mentioned. And it's not that we're building to an exit. I mean, obviously, we want to have the greatest impact we can. And ultimately we'll make the right decision through that lens, but also with a clear imperative to make sure that the folks who've taken a risk and invested in helping us build a business make a good return. And the reason an exit is attractive to us from a mission perspective is even 5 years out, we're hiring 100 people a year, whereas a Cognizant or an Accenture or even a tier down, hiring tens of thousands of people a year, and even a small fraction of those hires being on the spectrum or neurodivergent otherwise, has a much bigger impact than we could have ourselves.
Perfect. That's a great layout. One last call for any questions from anyone. We're coming up on our end here. But Rajesh, I want to thank you for your time today and everything. And for those on the phone, we will have a full due diligence package up on our platform by tomorrow. So for those of you who can log in, you'll be able to get that. We will send out an email reminding you to get that. And included in that, for those of you who are not on here, you'll be able to listen to this, a link to this video as well. So Rajesh, thanks for your time today. Thanks for the partners who came out today and asked great questions. And I will be talking to you soon, Rajesh.
Thank you. Thanks, TK. Sorry, I was on mute.
Yep, no problem. We'll talk soon.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.